Okay, we'll get started. As most of you know, I'm Steve Cox, president of the board here at the museum, and I'm glad to welcome you today for this very special presentation by Dr. Terry Maley. Because most of you in the room are members, you've probably heard Terry introduced many times, and most of the people who are going to be seeing this on video replay are members, and they know Terry's history. I'm just going to say that Terry has a distinguished career in geology throughout the western United States in Idaho and in the Pacific Ocean. He's the founding member of this museum and has been our most prolific and popular lecturer over the 30-plus years that the museum has been working. Basically, what we're going to do today is have two sessions with a 10-minute intermission in between. If you have specific questions about a slide, Terry will have you ask that at that time so he doesn't have to try to replay the whole presentation to get back to it. If you have just more general questions, we will have a question and answer at the end of each session. So please give a warm welcome to Dr. Terry Maley.
Well, thank you, Steve. When I pass on, I want Steve to give my eulogy. Okay, the topic here is how geology and geography influence settlement of the American West. I'm planning to cover a number of things, some seemingly unrelated, and these are the topics. The first hour, as you know, or may know, there's 2 hours, and we'll take a break in between, and I'll take questions at the end. Like Steve said, if you have a question on any of my images, a lot of them I prepared myself, just blurt it out and I'll work. Otherwise, it's too difficult to find it. Okay, we'll start out with the first settlers in America, which were, of course, the Native Americans. And then we'll work our way down through history of geologic understanding, because in the 19th century, science was pretty primitive. People didn't know what they know now, or even close. And so we'll talk about that a little bit. And 19th century geological surveys, the first surveys were in the 70s, the 60s and 70s, and public land surveys. I'm going to talk quite a bit about public land laws and the mining laws and how that influenced mining history, although it's really not a history talk. It's more about how the laws work to modify behavior in the field. Second hour topics is strictly Western mining law with lots of examples of early mining and mineral deposits, plasters, lodes, and what people are doing on the ground, how they interpret it, that sort of thing. Okay, the first little segment, and this is fairly brief, this shows the out of Africa scenario where people migrated 70 to 100,000 years ago out of Africa. This was, they came down through Australia and down here, and of course, during a lot of this ice age, it was during the during the glacial for the last ice age, which lasted more than 100,000 years. So the ocean was about 400 feet lower, so it made possible to go from one continent to another, particularly to get to Australia. And then over here, we're going to particularly talk about the dispersal of peopling of the Americas. This gives you a little bit different view. Remember from that other slide, we were showing people migrating across the Bering Line Bridge. You can't do it now because the ocean is much lower. During the interglacials of the Ice Age, the ice is about a mile thick on the poles, and the oceans are about 400 feet lower. And so that's why there was only a window of time to get over the Bering Straits. This shows the Aleutian arc here. This is Beringia, and that is now focusing down here, we had a huge ice sheet. In fact, almost all of Canada was covered by an ice sheet. We had the Cordilleran ice sheet here and the Laurentian ice sheet here. And these, about 11,000 years ago, separated. Okay, this is a different view of this. If you look at the lighter yellow, this shows you Siberia here, and it's not connected to Alaska. And so there's some water here. However, this shows during the Ice Age, between 50 and 11,000 years ago, Beringia was 1,000 miles wide. And so it was a homeland for what became the Native Americans for thousands of years. It wasn't, a land bridge doesn't describe it because it was so big, the size of 2 states of Texas. Okay, this shows the, the original idea for the migration of Native Americans into the Americas was to come down through an ice-free corridor between the Cordilleran and the Laurentian ice sheet. But just a few years ago, geologists figured out it wasn't even open and habitable until about 11,000 years ago, and we know the people had come down many thousands of years before that. So I prepared these illustrations that show, if you look up at the very top, you see a pink polar ice sheet. Well, this ice sheet, if you can picture it, is a mile thick. This weight of the ice sheet pushes down through what we call isostatic subsidence. And when you have the Earth pushing down, the surrounding Earth moves up. And so I call that isostatic uplift. This would be the continental shelves. So the continental shelves are coming up a few hundred feet where the ice sheet is pushing the land below it down. And so over here, and so that of course impacted greatly the shoreline and the coastal zone. And this shows what happens like normal times. And when the ice sheet left, we had uplift to come up here to replace the ice. And then we had the continental shelves with more. Now this is the continental shelf here. And so the water moved over on the shelves. And this illustration here, I showed at the glacial maximum, which was about 22,000 years ago. And during the glacial maximum then, picture the ice is pushing down, the isostatic subsidence, and then this would be where I have the goats and mammoths and shellfish beach and all that. That's where the land would be rising, and they call that a forebulge. So that would be probably fairly accessible, and that would be a zone that go all the way down through the coast. Okay, the latest population data, I'm relying on a lot. I read a lot of the primary literature, but Jennifer Raff just published a book a few months ago on the origin and genetic history of the Americas. And we come up with, this is pretty much a scientific consensus, but the dates keep rolling back. And now they're looking at about 17,000 years when the peoples came down, and 16 to 13,000 years when the split of the population into South America and North America. Now, another important thing when we talk about settling and discovery are loaded terms, because when you had Native Americans here had already discovered this stuff and had lived here for thousands, tens of thousands of years, we're reluctant to use those terms. But there was probably a population in America's estimate, pre-Columbian population, of somewhere between 50 and 100 million people, which is a lot of people. And the Western America was much more sparsely populated, but several million people probably is the best guess. And that's pretty hard to document, but they can come down with general categories. Oops, excuse me. And then we have what we call the population Y. And there's just a lot of stuff written about this. And this population Y, they're getting a lot of dates. And I refer to one that I just read, Tim Rowe, 2022. It was just published this month, probably this week, about human occupation of North America, Colorado Plateau, 37,000 years ago. So it's the Hartley Mammoth locality, and they don't have, of course, DNA from the site, but what they do have is they documented that it was butchered by humans, the mammoths were, and then they are able to date the mammoths with carbon-14. And so they get a pretty well-constrained date on that. Okay, geologic knowledge in the 19th century. This is where it all started in 1788. This is James Hutton, responsible for the modern geology. Because up until that time, if you took a university course in something that they might call earth science, it would have a religious explanation as to why things happened the way they did, usually the Noachian flood. But he came up with two big principles. One was endless cycles of uplift, erosion, and deposition, and then also deep time, that the earth has been here a very long time. And so he was by training a medical doctor, sort of like you, Steve, but he liked geology. And so that's where he made an enormous contribution. This is the famous Sicker Point. And Sicker Point is probably the most photographed and most wide-renowned. It's in every college freshman geology book, probably. And it's a beautiful unconformity. It's in Scotland, near Edinburgh, on the North Sea coast. And Louise and I, my wife, tried to find the place when we went to do a geologic pilgrimage, and we were driving on the North Sea coast, and I had a good map, and we figured we had to be there. And so Louise said, well, why don't you just go down and ask the guy in the quarry there where it is? And so I reluctantly went down and asked, and he said, oh, you must be a geologist. And I said, I confess I was. And he said, he pointed out, he said, you just park your car here at the quarry and just go over this path and cross the fence and go down to the beach. And there it was. So anyway. Okay, one of the importance of writing textbooks, this is Charles Lyell, and he didn't make any particular geologic contribution, except he put it all together in the most successful series of textbooks, 12 editions. That's how he made his money for a whole career. And everybody used his books. And so they all had the same language. They were all using the same jargon. They thought the same way about things. And so it was a good way for people to communicate for a start. And so his first principles, the reason I mentioned Charles Darwin, who fancied himself as a geologist, took a copy of Charles Lyell's book, the first edition, on the voyage of the Beagle. And so that's how he became a geologist, by reading Charles Lyell's book. Well, both Charles Lyell and Charles Darwin are buried in Westminster Abbey, and Charles Lyell was very religious, and Darwin was not particularly religious, as you probably know. So, okay, so we're moving on to what they knew. But you know, if everything you know is in one little book, you think of the numbers of books now, and if you're going to college now, the state of the knowledge in so many different fields, it can be overwhelming. The Ordinance of 1785, the key thing about that is one of the most important documents in public land history, because it set up a system for managing, selling, and disposing of the public lands. And so it included in this, they recognized you must have a survey system, and they came up with the public land survey system with sections, townships, and the mile square sections before settlement. And then when people get a homestead or a mining claim or anything else, they can describe it in reference to the public land survey system. And another thing too, they recognize we need a lot of money for public schools. And so they took sections 16 and 36 of every township, and that went to the states as endowment lands to provide funding for the public schools. And the states, for the most part, oh yes, one other thing, the states with pretty worthless land like Arizona and Nevada and places like that also got sections 2 and 32. So they got 4 sections. 4 out of 32 are 1/9 of the public domain in their state for public education. Well, as it turned out, most of this was used by the states for corrupt purposes, even in Idaho, and I'll explain how that went. In Idaho, I worked for the land department in the early 70s when I came here, and I had nothing to do with it, particularly with land sales or anything like that. But the way they had operated for hundreds of years in all the rural, where when the BLM would sell, the ranchers would all agree that somebody would have a turn and go bid on the land at the minimum bid, which is $10 an acre, even though the land could be worth $1,200 or $1,000. And so most of the land went at a mere fraction of its value, and the people that enriched themselves were the ranchers that took their turn and got another big ranch on a routine basis. And Idaho was doing this in the 70s. Well, I got this new boss they hired, and he recognized what was going on right away, and he started advertising, this is in Idaho, in the LA Times, and getting people with a lot of money up to bid on these lands. And guess what? He got rewarded for it by getting fired. So much for trying to do the right thing, huh? Okay, this just shows you some of the land acquisitions. We started out with Lewis and Clark, and we had the Louisiana Purchase in 1803, and of course Jefferson was a very curious guy, wanted to see what's going on out here. This, of course, Texas and all this land was just pretty much ripped away from Mexico through different means, but war and being annexed, and they even purchased a little bit of it there. And then Jefferson was real interested in this Oregon Territory, and he wanted to kind of stake that out. But when the size of the U.S. was like this, when Lewis and Clark went out. Okay, this just shows a diagram for a township where you have 36 sections in each one, and around each township on the northern and western boundaries you would have the modifications for errors. You would have it would be lotted, so because it was acknowledged that you know, the Earth's not flat. And they used to use stone monuments that were notched, but this brass cap monument that you find in most section coordinates now are great if you're doing any kind of surveying, because as most of you know, you can tell exactly where you are. These are the sections, the common quarter to these sections, and you know that you're in that township and range. Okay, so this is how it looks when they develop it on the ground, because, you know, the land's patented in sections or quarter sections. And so for public education, and this is my public school slide, 18% of the public domain, or 320 million, 28 million acres granted to states. You'd think there'd have been enough, there wouldn't be a need for property taxes if they'd have done the right thing with this school lands, but they didn't. Most of the states still have some of this land left, and that's what they manage now, the various state land departments. But look up here, the kids said, honesty is the best policy. So see, they're trying to, don't do what I do, but do what I say, I guess, huh? Okay, we'll get into these surveys. So anyway, this was the understanding in 1794 of the West. They thought there was one mountain range only 3,500 feet above the base, despite the fact Indian scouts have been telling them for years there were many mountain ranges. And so, but Arrowsmith, when he made this map, and so when Lewis and Clark went out, they used this instead of what, you know, was the actual case. Samuel Hearn's the one that proposed that single continental divide. And so here, to make it more enticing, they had the Missouri. They were going to follow up the Missouri. They thought then they could have a quick portage over this little Rocky Mountains and then get on the Columbia River or River Oregon and come on down to the coast. And so, of course, it didn't work out that way. This is the route here, of course, and they did follow the Missouri River up, and of course finally got to the Columbia and got on part of that. But there was a lot of country in between that they had a lot of trouble with. Okay, this is, Meriwether Lewis had a hand-drawn map, and, or Clark did, excuse me, William Clark, and this is what it looked like after they fixed it up and made it look like, but you have something more like what it actually exists, which is this. That's just a relief map, current relief map down below. Interesting character was this David Thompson, and he was the same vintage of Lewis and Clark, and he was an interesting guy because he had the most humble upbringing you could ever have. His mother turned him over to an orphanage when he was 7. He was born in England and destitute, but he was a very bright kid, and they recognized this in the orphanage, and they put him in a little school, and he learned to do map making and stuff like this. And so when he was 14, he was made an indentured servant to the North, one of the big fur trading companies in Northwest Company. Pardon?
Hudson Bay?
It was the Hudson Bay. Thanks, Coyote. Yeah, and so he worked for them, but then he jumped ship later and worked for the Northwest Company. And he lived to be 86 years. And he is called the greatest land geographer in the world. And he surveyed by walking 56,000 miles. And just to compare that with the circumference of the Earth is 24,900. So he did a lot of walking, and his maps were so good they were using them up even when I was in college. So, and that's because he did longitude. Any buffoon can do latitude, but to get longitude is a lot of work, and there's a lot of ways to interpret the data and so forth. And this just is one of the pages from one of his notebooks. And unlike Lewis and Clark that traveled with 40 people, he traveled alone. He just, he had an Indian scout with him, and just two guys, and they did this together. And I don't know if it's the same guy or not, but anyway, he did get married and had 13 children over 29 years, which is pretty amazing. Now you're immediately thinking, well, he probably had a bunch of different wives. No, he had one wife, but the secret to that being possible is that she was 13 when he married her. So, yeah, so that's pretty negative. But anyway, at one time they had the record in Canada for the longest marriage, for what that's worth. But he was, this is some of the sketches. Anyway, he surveyed the Columbia River, the entire river, all 1,250 miles of it, and started in 1806. And this is as he prolifically sketched with little watercolors. And this is along the Snake River. And you can tell what kind of rock he was looking at and everything. Basalt with columnar joining, and amazing guy. Here's not his field map, but the Columbia River was pretty challenging to, here it goes up through here and down here and comes down like this and out at Astoria. Okay, now the great surveys. We had 4 of them here that I'm going to show some slides of. Most of them, the Hayden survey and the Powell survey, and a few of the Clarence King surveys. But Powell did the Colorado River and the Plateau, which is this one. Hayden did Colorado and came over and got Yellowstone with Wyoming, the Tetons, and all that. Clarence King did the 40th parallel survey, and which is long and narrow, and George Wheeler did the red here, which is covered most of the west, but he only did topography. The rest of them did geology. So this is Ferdinand Hayden on his survey in Red Buttes, Wyoming in 1870. This is Hayden's the guy at the back of the table with the beard, and this guy is William Henry Jackson, early 20s. He's the one that did all these photographs, including this one. He was a very talented artist, but as well he was with the survey the full time for about 10 years, and he lived to be 99 years old, and the day he died, he was in his photographic studio working on photographs. So that was a great career. This is the 1871 survey, where the railroads joined at the Golden Spike Ceremony, 1869, in Ogden, and so instead of coming over on a wagon from back east, these surveys could take the train to Ogden, then they'd get probably hire people to take them up to Yellowstone or the Tetons or wherever they were going. This is Cache Valley, and this is spending the first night probably after leaving the train. Okay, this is having dinner. It's always interesting to see what they look like. The guy on the near left is Hayden, James Gardner, Steve Holman, And this is another great artist of Western landscapes, Bill Holmes. This is how they measure distance with just tow this behind a horse, and then you could get pretty good distances. I'm not sure it would be anywhere near as accurate as that David Thompson was getting many decades before. And here's a Hayden party arriving in Yellowstone. Hayden had as many as 200 people in his survey parties at one time. And this is a William Henry Jackson, the Old Faithful photograph. He has just thousands and thousands of wonderful images. This is on Specimen Ridge, taken by William Henry Jackson. Those are metasequoia trees from a fossil forest, or a forest. The trees are still in place. And this is drawn by William Holmes, a stack of fossil forests. He counted 27 forests stacked up. Well, in Mountain Gulch in Idaho, we have 7 forests stacked up in one place, and those are metasequoia trees also, and they're also an Eocene forest. So 55 million years ago or so. And this is the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone by Thomas Moran. This helped sell Congress on making Yellowstone into a national park. And an interesting side note on this is Moran sold this to Congress right after he painted it for $10,000. Well, if you index that $10,000 for inflation, you're talking about $350,000. But the painting is 7 feet by 12 feet. And if you've done any oil painting, it is an oil painting. And you know you would use a lot of oil paint to come up with that. So anyway, here's Hayden sitting on the bench, and that's Walter Paris there talking in camp. In almost every photograph, they have their rifle on the ground nearby. It's always outside the tent for some reason, on the ground. And this is flapjack, Potato John flipping flapjacks and getting ready to go in the morning. And this is an interesting image from the quarrying of granite to build the Mormon Temple, 1872. William Henry Jackson took this photo, and you know, they're just splitting that perfect square blocks using just a chisel or whatever they call it. Just hand labor. It looks like hard labor. Here's the photo outfit, William Henry Jackson's photo outfit. He used to carry it on a mule he called hypo. And those are all glass plates in there. Okay, this is Jackson and one of his assistants photographing the Tetons. In 1872, Ferdinand Hayden came back and surveyed the Tetons. And so that's part of this survey. Here, when they have their wagons and they cross over a mountain range, they have to totally disassemble them, which was pretty common back in those days, but a lot of work. And the horses had to carry it over them, obviously take a bunch of trips to get everything over. So it's kind of like a portage. And this is Hayden's Colorado survey. That's Chittenden and Holmes there on the right. And Holmes is probably drawing in the topography. Okay, now we move into John Wesley Powell's 1869 expedition. He had a crew of 9 people, much smaller, much lower budget than Hayden's extravaganza. And Powell was not scientist or anything. He was a school teacher, but he never went to college. And but that was not uncommon with a lot of geologists in those days. But he was self-taught and very bright. And the photographer Jack Hillers also did great work, and he would be among the people here. And he took 4 boats and 3 21-foot boats, one 16-foot called the Imodine. That was his boat. And this is a photograph of the whole crew. I believe the guy standing up there is John Maley. He was missing an arm that he had. He fought in the Civil War. He was outraged by slavery. He went in the Civil War and lost an arm in combat. And as soon as it healed up, he went right back in again. So when the war is over, he had a way of talking his way into good things. So he did this. He eventually became the director of the U.S. Geological Survey. So anyway, as I mentioned, the river drops 7,000 feet during this expedition. He starts at the Green River. The regular Colorado River had already been run. And you know, when the water's quiet, that means you're going over sandstone. And when it breaks through the sandstone, then watch out. So that's why they're portaging there. And one thing Hillers always did, Jack Hillers, the photographer, he always had a human in the slide. And there is the little human up on the side of that canyon wall, posing, of course. Powell was very interested in the Indian cultures and everything, and he became director of the first Bureau of Ethnography, and I think they, as well as USGS, and he's talking with a Paiute Indian here in 1869, and you can see his right arm is the missing one. He's the only one that wore a life jacket on the expedition, and it's because presumably he couldn't swim very well with one arm. Here's Jack Hillers working, developing stuff. It's not like digital photography, I'm sure. Here's John Stewart, and the interesting thing about this photo, all the photos I got of all the surveys, you know, the repeating Winchester rifle came out in 1866. He's got one. Didn't do him any good. He was killed the next day. But it's a good picture of the rifle. So anyway, Powell on the survey, his surveys were of limited value because he mostly had cronies and friends come along. And they, of course, were not scientists or trained or even interested. But he did bring his brother-in-law, who was a professor of geology, and he did very, very good things, well worth the money. And that's Professor Harris Thompson, and on his horse there. Okay, now Clarence King, he really started early. He actually had geologic training at Yale University, and so he sort of stands apart. Hayden was a medical doctor. He was a physician in the Union Army, and had a lot more medical training than geology, but of course was only interested in geology. Clarence King was just strictly geology, and he talked Congress into funding this 40th parallel survey, which is going to be 100 miles wide, basically a huge cross-section of the continent. And it, of all the surveys that, of the 4 surveys, probably the 2 best ones were George Wheeler's topographic survey, because he did good work. even though he was criticized because he wasn't an academic. And Clarence King spent 12 years surveying. He surveyed clear across the continent, clear across the Rockies with this 100-mile wide strip, and his reports were really superb and became a model of their kind and very useful for decades in the future. This is just where they're doing an astronomical survey in Nevada. So they recognize the importance of good surveying and accurate positions. They kind of got off their band here, but this is their photographer, Clarence King's photographer was Timothy O'Sullivan. And this is one he took, and you all recognize that. Although it's changed a little, that's of course the Shoshone Falls, looking over the falls, and they have their tent up, and it must be a little R&R. And this is, so Sullivan was pretty creative. The Comstock lode had not been discovered too long. They were underground, and he used magnesium lighting to take this underground shot. So that's kind of neat. Okay, I'll talk about a few of the various geologists that were working more independently. This is Charles Doolittle Walcott, 1850-1927. This is when he was a younger man. Notice that in a lot of these, they're in a suit and tie, three-piece suit and tie, and that's what they worked in. It's sort of like most of you can remember when you were young and you traveled on airplanes. There would never be anybody in a plane that didn't have a suit and tie on. Now it's hard to believe it and hard to remember it, but that's the way it was. Anyway, I think they liked the fact that they considered surveyors were the same way, and I got some of those. And I think they felt like they didn't want to be confused with peasants or something like that. I don't know what the thought was. That's a beautiful syncline, by the way. Here is Charles Walcott in the Bighorn Mountains, and you see a lot of the early geologists use these. 2 horses pulling this. You could for one thing, you could carry your allidated plane table, you could carry all your other equipment, you could get rock samples, and a horse, would rebel if he had to carry all that stuff. And this is Walcott later in time. He was director of the USGS also, and of course he never went to college. He was self-taught. He became a paleontologist, took an interest in it, but it was sort of a journeyman system. He worked for paleontologists and published a lot of stuff that still stands, quality stuff. But he discovered the Burgess shale fossils, which was a huge find. And so here he is at that time. This is the Johnson plane table. Well, the plane table mapping has been around for since the 16th century, but people tweak them a little bit and name them after them, I guess. And so, but that's another device that if you're a young geology student, you wouldn't use an allidated plane table anymore. I did. I was trained on them in my first few projects because you can make topography and a geologic map all in one map, and it works pretty well. But where you have a baseline, you triangulate off of it, But that's what they use. This is a close-up of it. But it was standard equipment through much of the 19th century and even a big part of the 20th century. Here are some geologists, probably about 1900, using an allidated plane table. And they don't have suits on, but boy, are they dressed up. This is Waldemar Lindgren, one of the great early economic geologists. He traveled all over the West and Canada and Alaska and even mapped around here. And I think I remember that he thought this little rhyolite out here was a laccolith. That's where, yeah, so anyway, he did get around. And yeah, I think he mapped a few quads.
So he was staked Eagle Rock for battle, remember?
Yeah, right. Yeah. So sometimes even he got it wrong. Okay, this is kind of a little survey party, and this is the way it would work. This would be for the base camp, and they'd haul out all their stuff and maybe stay all summer. And then you'd have the one or two geologists would take little field forays during the daytime, and so they could travel light, cover a lot of ground, and map that way. This is G.K. Gilbert. He worked for Powell for a while. He was one of the first really clever geologists, and probably the most clever thing he ever did is when he was surveying old Lake Bonneville, he noticed that the wave-cut terraces were tilted, and he surmised that this tilting had to come from a isostatic rebound after the water had drained off. So that was a very clever thing. So a smart guy, more like us. Okay, one good thing about old photographs is you can see things the way they were at the time. And one of the sad things, so-called development can destroy things. This Thousand Springs, it was a curtain of water for hundreds and hundreds of meters, and of course now there's just a few trickles here and there because it's all captured in the fish farms and low head hydro and that sort of thing. So at least we know what it looked like. This is Umpleby. He did a lot of research and good papers in east central Idaho, around Chalice and north up towards Salmon. And this is what he would eat. His dish, getting ready for dinner. But it's uncommon to see an old photograph of that, but good for him for thinking it might be of interest to people someday. Okay, Western migration and wagon trains. This is the Oregon Trail here, and it starts, of course, near St. Louis, comes all the way out and ends in the Dalles, Oregon. And then you got two choices there I'll talk about in a minute. People came out between 1830 and 1869. Of course, it ended in 1869 because why on earth would you take a wagon train when you could get on the train, be out in a week or less? So anyway, 400 people. I had ancestors, three of my ancestors, great-grandparents came out on the Oregon Trail, and all went to the Willamette Valley, and then kind of moved on from there. This is South Pass City. The South Pass is the route of the wagon trains getting over the Rockies. The elevation here is 7,860 feet. This is just my picture of a homestead. You know, when guys try and talk their wives into it back east, they say, what a glorious living this would be. It can be pretty grim. This is the first homesteader, his tombstone, Daniel Freeman. And he was a lot of things, even a doctor supposedly, but probably not trained, right, Steve? But anyway, he got the first homestead on January 1st, 1863. The rumor is that he spent the night before with the land agent at a party and lined it all up. So he got the first homestead. But this is the little histogram shows the number of homesteads in the years. Years are interesting. It went from 1862 was the day the Act, 1863 first homestead, all the way, they stopped or dribbled down to almost nothing in 1960. But I can remember in the 40s when I lived in Umatilla, neighbors were staking homesteads around in the 1940s. So under the Homestead Act, of course, there have been other methods like desert land entries, even in the 70s, up until 1976, people were getting homesteads in a lot of areas. This is the peak, 1916, and of course, 1917 was the Stock Raising Homestead Act. There were hordes of homesteads under that. You got a whole section, it didn't have to be irrigated, and like wheatland and dry land farming, and so that was very popular. These things were restricted to 160 acres, which is a quarter of a section, so it better be irrigated or you're not going to be able to make a living on it, most likely. Okay, this is in Eugene, Oregon, but notice they have the city hospital up above. The sign, you probably can't read, it says furniture and undertaking. And the furniture, they make caskets, and the undertaking, it's just use gravity to move the people out. So it'd be a little disheartening if you had to check in there, probably. Okay, the transcontinental railroads were really changed things. First thing they did is figure out where they wanted an ideal route. They came up with 5 of them, and they did surveys, geographic surveys of these routes, and they were spectacular, really high quality, 13 volumes. So those were the first good geologic surveys of the West, basically cross sections, if you will. Here are railroad surveyors, look at them all dressed up. And of course their instruments and everything, stadia rods. And this is a 1,000-mile tree. This is 1,000 miles from Omaha. I guess building the Union Pacific part of the railroad. And this is just shows you the difficulty going through the Rockies and the Sierras, where you had to notch enough room up there on the side of the canyon walls to get a track in there. And I'm sure you've taken some of these trains, and it's a little bit scary. But apparently the Chinese did most of that work. They would tie them to ropes over the edge, and they would drill and blast, and it was incredibly dangerous and hard work. There's another interesting thing, building trestles. This one's 1,100 feet long and 130 feet high. They have 2 of them for two ways on the train. And the thing is, if you've ever worked with big timbers, like 12 inches by 18 inches, these things probably weigh 800 pounds apiece. And so look up here, you see people. And they're building that thing. And there wouldn't be many people building that. There'd be probably a half a dozen people. So it's a lot of work, but sometimes they didn't work. This is from the Stockbridge collection. Yeah, it's. Okay, this is the Golden Spike ceremony. Leland Stanford drove the Golden Spike, and 1869, linking the Central Pacific that came up from Sacramento into the Union Pacific Railroad. I went over this one. This is it's a poor quality image, but it's a great subject because it shows Leland Stanford coming out on the Golden Spike ceremony, for the Golden Spike ceremony on the train. And the last wagon train heading out, they've probably been going for 3 months, grubbing their way along. And so they should have waited a few months and taken the train. So, this is the railroad's got an enormous amount of public land for building the railroads. 128 million acres. There were two main railroad acts. There was the 1862, which gave 10 miles, the odd sections on either side of the line. And then the 1864 doubled the grant to 20 miles. And then there was another 10-mile indemnity for indemnity lands if their place lands were already taken. So altogether you have a 60-mile wide strip, but it's only the odd numbered sections, and it's only 40 miles wide for the place lands. But anyway, it's a lot of land. And there were many, it was very scandalous, and of course many books were written about what a ripoff it was to people because they didn't give anybody a break on the tickets. Okay, this is a Buckner's snow plow through 30-foot drifts. 1867, back in those days, 30 and 40-foot drifts were the norm. This is a rotary snow plow, a huge advancement. It had 10 times the capacity of the Buckner snow plow. Okay, that will take care of the first session. Let's take, how much time do you want to take, Steve?
Let's take 10 minutes.
Okay.
Just quickly, are there any general questions that anybody would like to?
You can also think about them and at the end.
Or we can do them at the end. So I have on my watch, I've got about 4 after. And so if we could be back here by no later than quarter after, please. And then we'll have the second session and proceed with questions at that point.
Okay, we're really shifting gears. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, we're shifting gears, and the rest of the balance of the program is on mining and minerals, and particularly in reference to the evolution of the federal mining laws. And here I put just a brief history. The first mining law was in 1866. So you know when the early miners, like the 49ers, were out, there was no legal regime. They were just trespassing. They were just stealing the minerals from the government, or if you will, the Native Americans. And so anyway, Congress put out a load law because they thought all the valuable plasters were mined out during the gold rush. But they were wrong, of course, and so they followed up and they heard about it. And so the Placer Act of 1870. Then in 1972, they put the two together, and which the 1872 general mining law superseded the previous two. And 1872, I started to work on the mining law in 1972, so it's my 50th anniversary, but I haven't fooled with it much the last 20 years. I did write 6 books on the subject, and starting in 1977, and I was the only single volume book available on the mining law for 40 years, so that's why I'm here, by the way. Okay, the next big thing that happened is the Mineral Leasing Act came and took certain minerals like oil and gas and coal and phosphate and made them leasable and excluded them from the location system so the federal government could get royalties and rentals and stuff like that from the product. The Materials Act took away the sand, gravel, building stones, stuff like that, all the materials that's generally used in construction. The Common Varieties Act of 55 made the exception of something uncommon variety has a unique property, given a special and distinct value, then it could still be locatable, and a lot of gem minerals come under this. So that's interesting. And then the federal mining law didn't affect minerals, but what it did is set up a very sophisticated recordation system of claims, because there were tens of millions of claims on the public domain when the Federal Land Policy and Management Act That act terminated all the homestead acts. It terminated a lot of withdrawal acts, initiated withdrawal acts. So it was a huge act. And I was in the business at the time, and because of what I did, I got hundreds of death threats. They didn't take it lightly. Okay, we'll move on. Okay, these are the different types of claims. You had load claims, placer claims. A placer claim, depending on the number of co-locators, you could have up to 160 acres, 120-acre placer per person. But the thing is, you could have any number of claims you wanted. There were people with hundreds of thousands of claims when FLPMA, or the Federal Land Policy and Management Act, came along in 1976. And part of that was to get rid of some of those people, and they did it by putting a $100 fee per year on each claim, a recordation fee. However, they had a 10 claim that would come under the limit that you could have without paying. So they weren't after the small guy, just the people that were in the real estate business. Okay, mill sites, this is where you process the claims. I'll talk about those later, 3 different types. The independent mill sites where there's not an associated placer load, and those associated with, and then tunnel sites. This is locating a claim in the late 1800s. The state laws almost always, and have for many, many decades, required a monument that's 4 inches by 4 inches by 4 feet high. And so you can use a tree, or you can use 2x4, or 4x4, excuse me. Here is the geologist reading the location notice. Monuments are important in the field because the law is held that they have precedence over any recorded description. Like if you record the position of a claim in the courthouse, and it's where the claims are on the ground. And if you don't have monuments on the ground, you're in non-compliance with state law. A lot of places you'll see generations of claims. Here we have an original location. You can use for a new claim the old locations if you want, as long as they meet state specs. This one didn't, so they put in a beautiful painted 4x4. This is a quarter corner for the public land surveys, so you know you can take to the bank the position of that corner. This happens to be a placer claim, a building stone placer claim for Oakley stone, which is locatable, or can be. And in Idaho, one of a number of states, you don't have to.
Terry,
Yeah, John?
Locatable, I'm not sure.
Okay, good question, because, you know, I've been in the jargon so long, I forget. There's mining law jargon and there's minerals jargon. And sometimes there's terms like loads that geologists wouldn't usually use. Miners use them, but geologists know what the load is. What was your question?
Locatable, I mean, is that?
Oh, locatable. Okay, that means locatable under the mining law. And in other words, you can stake a claim on it. Let's say you found a gold vein. That would be locatable because it would rise to the the level of what the government requires for a valid claim. And I'll talk about that actually in a minute. But that's a good question, and I need more people like you. Okay, this is a overkill here. This is a location notice in here. There's one screwed to the monument here or through the lid of that bottle. And then they engrave it on aluminum plate, the location of the claim, the name of the claim. But that's as good as you see it. I've looked at claims all over the West and did so for many years, and I can tell you that most claims are not monumented, and if they are, it's pretty bad, in other words, no location notice, or if there is a location notice, a lot of people, if they want to locate the claims, they'll throw away the monuments and put their own down. The courts have ruled that, though, you can't get away with that, but it's might makes right in the mining law business in the field. Okay, this is a sketch I did to show a load claim, all the elements of a load claim. You know, when Congress passed this, load to them as a vein, and they thought this is what they envision as a locatable mineral, is it would be a lode for a lode location. And so what you do, you're entitled to 300 feet on either side of the center line of the vein, and you're allowed 1,500 feet along the length of the vein for 600 feet by 1,500 feet, which is close to 20 acres. And then this, of course, there's just underground ways you would develop it with a shaft and then reach it with a crosscut. Now, in Idaho, we're one of the key states, the northern Idaho, where we had the silver belt for the law of the apex, or extralateral rights, which is a part of the mining law. Many of the most important Supreme Court cases originated in Idaho. And the extralateral rights are that portion of the vein that come out the side. Now, out in the Coeur d'Alene, they have huge veins a mile deep and maybe 100, 200 feet thick of silver, lead, zinc, arsenic type veins. And they crisscross and everything. And so they had a lot of trouble at depth when people would get down there. You know, you really don't know where you are. And you meet somebody else and you have to, you know, get rid of them. So it was rough business. Okay, this is an adit. We call it an adit. In the miner, I took this slide 50 years ago in Nevada. But it's, what I always did is when I'd see a working with no possibility for mineralization, I would photograph it and try and figure out what the guy was looking at that caused him to spend months of work looking for something. And in this case, it was just red rock. He thought that was mineralized rock. Well, it wasn't. It was, the red was from hematite, but it was not what he thought it was. And you can see some manganese dioxides and stuff like that. But anyway, that's an adit, and he timbered it and everything, so he did a good job. This is another adit along a bedding plane shear. See, here is the bedding coming towards me and dipping towards me. In this case, he didn't timber it. And never had seen production. Now this is a shaft that probably saw production. There's a lot of almost ore grade material up at the surface. This is in Nevada, and I took this one about 50 years ago too. And that's a Discovery Monument, and the shaft, you know, you don't go down in them usually, but you hold the rock over and see how long it takes to get to the bottom. That gives you a clue. And this doesn't look very enticing here. Normally, this is the most shoddy head frame I ever saw. Most of them are nice square timbers. But this prospector apparently didn't have much money, so, excuse me. Here's one of my colleagues. He apparently disappeared about 10 years ago, and he used to like to go down in these without a helmet or anything, and very curious guy, and we all figured that he went down and never came back one time. This is a tunnel site. It's sort of an obscure thing. You don't see many of them anymore, but you drive a tunnel. Well, for the most part, they drive what we call adits. That's one opening at one end. Tunnel has two openings, of course, goes all the way through. And you mark on the surface the line of the tunnel, and you're trying to find a vein that may or may not exist, like this apex of a buried vein. It's to find buried veins. It's like a prospecting permit. And if you go in here and you intersect that vein, you can go up and locate a claim over it, and you are entitled to have a discovery date that goes back to the date you initiated the tunnel. Okay, this is my little pedis possessio slide. You know, I mentioned there have been, back in the 50s and 60s, tens of millions of claims in the West. Nevada was just covered with claims. And the federal requirement for a discovery is basically you have to be able to operate the property at a profit, and not just like one day, but have a commercial mine. And so it's a very high standard. And one of the things I used to do is go out on these claims and verify the discovery. And most of the time you couldn't verify anything because it was a goat pasture, as we used to call it. So anyway, with all these claims, the federal law evolved to come up with a concept called pre-discovery rights, or pedis possessio. This is the creature of the courts. It's not in the statute. And basically what it says, if you have a claim and you are trying to make a discovery, your right is better than anybody else's as long as you hold and work the claim and keep others off. You got to have, and so that's why they always did it with a rifle, which of course is the only thing that works out there. The U.S. holds the legal title. It gives them no rights against the U.S. The claimant has a possessory title until they go to patent. Congress stopped the patent process about 30 years ago or so. So there haven't been any patents issued. There, for a while they were processing ones that had been pending for a long time. Even though the mineral deposit is invisible at the surface, if you have drilling that intersects the ore body, that can qualify as a physical discovery. And when I say physical, that's what the courts say. The law, the discovery of the valuable mineral has to be physical. This is, of course, a vein. It's bull quartz, and any geologist would look at that and know that it probably didn't have anything in it. But the next one I show you would. But anyway, it's a good example of a vein. And the federal law says, all it says about, you know, what is the lode versus what is the placer. Lode is veins or lodes of quartz or other rock in place. Placer deposits are presumably everything else. You know, that worked fine until they got into the mineral deposits that are disseminated. You can't see them, the no-see-em mineral deposits, where, mineral deposits with very irregular form. And so the course would go back on, well, was it a sedimentary deposit or was it metamorphic, or, you know, it's like those Witwatersrand basin gold properties, which of course wouldn't apply here. They were probably gold and conglomerate, but they were metamorphosed and created the lode out of it. So anyway, here's a rusty vein, and we're getting ready to go down in it and take samples, but it's been refractured several times, and those are the kind of veins you'll usually find something to recover in. In fact, we always used to take mortar and pestle with us and grind them down and pan out just to see if we're on the right track. This is a phosphate deposit, and as I mentioned earlier, phosphate was excluded under the Mineral Leasing Act of 1920 as a locatable mineral. But so a lot of the early phosphates were patented, and they were patented as both lode and placer. And you can see what the problem is here. This is a phosphate-rich ore here. It's a sedimentary deposit. It's a dipping. It's a vein shape, and so it fits the definition of a lode, and it's sedimentary, of course. So that's how it can be argued as a placer. So they have been patented both ways. And this is the opal mine, and these vesicles that contain the opal are scattered around, but we patent this property. As a lode property, even though it's just basically cavity filling of random cavities. There had to be enough cavities and so forth to make it into a commercial operation, and gem grade and all that. This is my dad, and I took this I think in 1967, and he had located in the 50s some jasper in Oregon, some of the, he calls it wascoite or Biggs Junction jasper. It's the only jasper that's been found in Columbia River basalt, or any basalt for that matter, as far as I know. And this is the way it looks. And it's, because of that, it's the most valuable of the jaspers. There's very little of it. Well, like turned out, I inherited it all, and I don't want to fool with it. I'm turning it over to my son, who suddenly got interested in it. And the same way with the Bruno jasper, we've patented some of those properties too. This is that egg shape. You see the rhyolite encapsulating the cavities. This is a fluorite vein. You see the center line of the vein where it's growing towards the center line, filling the vein. So a vein can be a fraction of an inch, and it can be hundreds of feet. I've seen them both, and both can be patented, or could have been, or can be locatable. It just depends on the value. This is an opal, common opal, so it's not locatable, up in the Pearl District, but it's the apex of the vein. The apex of the vein is the highest point of the vein, where it crops out on the surface. It's also the apex even if it doesn't crop out, if it's 200 feet down. And then here is a fluorite vein, several feet thick, and those are just students grabbing samples. I went back a while later and it was all gone. Generations of students can be toxic to mineral deposits. Oops, sorry. This is just how you might mine underground that vein that we just looked at, the fluorite vein. But what they did is they blew off this entire head wall chunk and exposed the vein, and they just rake it down with the equipment. This is one of the porphyry copper deposits in Arizona. There's lots of them, and you can see it's covered with about 200 feet of desert sand. Well, they would have found this with geophysical exploration, and then they would drill it in case something's down there. And so first they would intersect its oxide ore down to about to here, and then the primary ore below that. And so they had to truck out all this waste, an enormous amount of waste, all the oxide ore and the desert sands to get to the ore down here. So it's not a very efficient kind of way to go. But anyway, that's just a simple cross-section. It's a simple mining method for people, easy to understand. Back to mill sites. This is copper waste. This is not the overburden. This is the tailings that had been heap leached, and so it's pretty toxic. And they were trying to sell these things for home sites, but they weren't getting a lot of takers. You know, if you drilled a well into that, it'd probably be, it's talk about toxic. But anyway, it's all covered, it was covered by mill sites that were patented. Hundreds. A mill site can only be 5 acres, and but there's no limit as long as you need them. Just like there's no limit how many load claims or placer claims or mill sites or tunnel sites any one of you can locate tomorrow if you've got the time and money. There never has been a... This is the Elmer Swanson mill site. Has anybody seen that? This is on the trail going into the White Clouds, and it's along the East Fork. Anyway, Idaho, he had all this stuff on a mill site, and now there's a lot of stuff on mill sites in the mining law because of Elmer Swanson. And it's in a Statesman about 10 years ago, they had an article that when the federal authorities went out there, they found his dead wife in a snowbank, and she had died of natural causes, but he was getting her Social Security check, so he just took her out there and put her on the snowbank. And so these are the people that are writing the mining law. Pretty gross, but true. This is a smelter. It's a Phillipsburg smelter in eastern Nevada, but it's just a good example of many smelters were built or processing plants that didn't work. And it's because it's very complicated to recover ore from a deposit. The mineralogy, it's always different. And so just a waste of money. Okay, now we'll go through placers. This is the only innovation that we've seen to placer pans in in my 50 years in the mining business, where he put handles on it to save his back. Placer mining has been called the poor man's method of mining because almost anybody can afford a gold pan. And that's a gold pan with some gold in it, and the black sands and so forth, concentrated. Again, to show you what eight locators can get one claim this big. So there's the advantage of 8 locators to go in together to get a large claim versus one person getting enough claims to equal that. And the reason is because only one discovery is required, one set of assessment work, so you can save a lot of money. The bigger the claim, and you have fewer monuments, less paperwork, so it makes sense to and so that's why this concept of dummy locators came up. We found that a lot of people are using their pets and so forth as locators, and a pet doesn't qualify. Here is the California Gold Rush, a few words about that, 1848 to 1859. They usually last like the probably 10 years at the very longest, usually. And here's the Mother Lode country here. It's just to the east of Sacramento. Sutter's Mill was down here, and of course James Marshall, a carpenter, found the gold on Sutter's Mill. Sutter had an old Spanish land claim he was working. And then when the gold miners came out, they totally destroyed his land, and he lost, the people, as I showed you earlier on the map, of all that's Spanish or Mexican territory, the U.S. nabbed. Well, there were a lot of Spanish land claims within that, and was supposed to be honored, but anyway, his wasn't. So This is a sluice box. This just shows you some of the, look at the young woman is all dressed up. Even these guys are pretty well dressed for miners. This is, didn't take long for California, and all through the West they got these hydraulic giants where they'd pipe water in under tremendous hydraulic pressure from miles away in some cases. In Idaho, we got plumes all over the state that were carrying water in some big pipes. And what they do is they take a big mountain of this stuff. It's usually unconsolidated or semi-consolidated gravels. And then they would blast it and bring the gold in suspension. And then the water, there's tremendous amounts of water, tremendous amounts of energy, and they trap it in sluices. And then they recover the gold. But it's devastating to the downstream water users. In California, they really raised hell, and they did too in Idaho. You know, we have a dredge act here that's been on the books for longer, going back into the 50s, I believe. Okay, this another thing they did, you know, I remember when I was a little kid and I was out with my brother, we were about 10, and we saw a bunch of fish in a pond. My dad had a ranch, and we said, the way to get those fish is just take all the water out and get the fish. Well, that's what they're doing here. They're diverting this river like this, and it's very sophisticated how they're doing it. I mean, it's engineered, and they set these things up to get energy to run equipment. And you know, most riverbeds have an inner channel that is lower than the rest of the river, and that's where all the gold is. 99% of the gold in this river is going to be at the bottom of this channel. So this is bedrock here in the sketch, you can just tell, but they found an inner channel where the heavy gold is 20 times as heavy, you know, is water. And so it's going down to the very base of bedrock. And so there's an old rule that 90% of gold will be within a foot above or below bedrock. And if you're in the gold business, you better know that or you're not going to last long. So anyway, they're bringing stuff out to be probably very carefully washed from this inner channel. This just shows you some really basic information on the current relative to where you might prospect on a stream. And this is the current always gouges and cuts and erodes on the outside meander. It makes a point bar on the inside meander, and it grows in this direction. So if the miner would put a claim on this, and you wouldn't waste your time there. And the same goes for this little island where two streams come together. Wherever the current slows, that's when you'll have deposition of gold. This, I think I'll pass on that. This is along the Salmon River, and the Salmon River up around Shallows has some of the best examples you'll find anywhere of, the miners call them high bars, but they're bars that represent an old bedrock of the Salmon River. And here in this one place, I'm sure some of you have seen this, there's a recreation site right here where the Salmon River originally was up here as it worked its way down to these volcanics, and then it was this bench. And if you go to those benches, you'll find gravels, usually very coarse gravels like cobbles and boulders. And when the miner says he has a high bar placer, that means he's found gold on one of these. Well, you don't have to worry about water getting in your way, but you have to worry about no water to help you process. But they got gravity to work for them. They can take their gravel, go down to the river and wash it down there, and that's been done a lot. Here's a stream channel. This is up the Yankee Fork, and that's the gravel. So the best place to find gold would be, of course, right at the base there of that channel. If you have a gold pan, you can just scoop a little in and go pan it. I've done dozens of them, and I never failed, even when there's no gold reported for 50 miles. You will always find gold. Not enough to make any money, but here's another channel above here. You see the cobbles? You're not looking for the angular stuff. That would be colluvium. You're looking for rounded river cobbles that were rounded off in a stream. And this is up on the side hill, and that's a granite bedrock there. So if I were going to send somebody up to sample that, I'd have them take a look at that right there. And here is one that's really easy to see, where the geologist is pointing to the lowest point on bedrock, and you see it's an old channel of the Salmon River filled with gravel now. And probably a lot of you have seen this between Sunbeam and Chalice. The highway took this old riverbed terrace and scraped the gravels back, maybe to use for roadbed material, keep them from rolling down on the traffic, because it's all cobbles and boulders and they're round, and they'll roll right down and land on a car. And so you can go up there and you'll be the first to take your gold pan and scoop up, get in the cracks and get some gold. This is a really valuable placer. This was up at Atlanta, and I knew the claimant, and we were just working with him, but he would spend all day just moving one little chunk of the bedrock out of the way, and he had a little suction dredge and would suck it out and would get a couple ounces of gold a day, which is, $2,500 an ounce would add up, and just sit there and, drink a beer while he was doing it. Here's a little inner channel up in Atlanta. There you see the trommel back there, which is the huge circular screen. They get rid of the oversize, and then, but this is, he's got a suction dredge here, and he's cleaning this. It's just like that example in that 100-year-old sketch or 150-year-old sketch in California of that big river where they diverted to get into this deep inner channel. This is up the Yankee Fork, and I drew this sketch for my book, but here you have the bedrock, which is the first 3 miles as you go up to Yankee Fork is granitic batholith. Then you get into the Permian Grand Prize formation, which is sedimentary rock, old sedimentary rock. And so when you get up towards where they started dredging, they couldn't dredge where the granite was because the channel was too narrow. They couldn't get to dredge in there. So they started as soon as they got out of the granite. I don't know if they knew why they had to wait to get out of the granite. And so then there's elevated terraces, and the largest nugget in Idaho was found up Jordan Creek, which is about a mile above the dredge, now where the dredge is occupied if you go up towards Custer. It was 33 ounces, I think. Oop. Okay, this is up at Lucille. This was the Salmon River runs through here, and there's river gravels, which I'll show you in the next slide. And the Chinese drove adits under it. The gravels are 200 feet thick, and the Chinese fully understood that all the gold was on bedrock or in the pay streaks. A pay streak is the little channel, the little deeper channel. So they drove these adits in. They didn't timber them, and then they would take the gravels in sacks and pull it down to the river and wash it. And so You can no longer see this now. Last time I was up there, somebody dozed all this in for some reason. But they had all these Chinese constructed adits here along, and see, this is bedrock. This is the old sedimentary accreted terrain that comes through here. And everything above here is 200 feet of gravel. And so you don't want to process all that gravel, you just want to process stuff that has gold in it. And this is what they went in. You know, you had to go in on all fours and come back that night on all fours. Hard way to make a living. This is a buried placer we got down in near Idaho, on Morse Creek, you know, coming into Boise. And here you see we have all these canyon-filling basalts. We had 3 different ages of canyon-filling basalts come down the South Fork of the Boise River. And this filled in Morse Creek, and then the river cut down through it. Here you see a wedge of basalt that's still existing. It's just a residual remnant, erosional remnant left. And this is where it covered the river, and the river's gone, but the gravels are still there. I'm photographing this about 20 feet above the river. So the river cut down, not only back down through all that basalt again, but down through the batholith to get to probably 300 feet since this was buried. Okay, so these are river gravels, and obviously this would be the best place to sample if you wanted to sample. This is exposed right on Highway 21. You can see it from the highway while you're driving through. This is one that also right on 21, that where the Chinese pulled all the gravel out, took it down to the river to wash it. And there were apparently a number of cases in the early mining law about whether this should be a placer or a lode because of the nature of it. I won't get into it, we don't have time, but it's an uncommon type of deposit. Here they're getting ready to divert a river. One thing they did in Idaho, if they could, they would divert a river. And so they did. And okay, water rights, because you know they're going to take this water maybe 3 miles, 5 miles, 10 miles away. And of course, water rights, it's called prior appropriation in the West, and it's a system where first in time, first in right. You got to use the water for beneficial use, and you have to have a specific point of diversion. And I use 2 examples: a senior appropriator and a junior appropriator. The way the appropriation works, if there's a short water year, the senior appropriator can take all the water he needs or in his water right, and the junior locator, he doesn't share at all unless he wants to, gets nothing. Unless there's enough to go over for the junior. That's sort of like the situation is over appropriated rivers like the Snake River, grossly over appropriated. And all those people that got desert land entries that planned to irrigate and pump from wells in the 70s, 1970s, you know, have very, very junior water rights. Okay, here they're building a flume to convey water. This is in Idaho. And here is the flume constructed. Some places in the Boise Basin, you can see quite a bit of evidence of this still existing. Here's a hydraulic giant, of course, in the Boise Basin. The problem is with this, from an environmental point of view, it washes away, finds, leaves the course. Dredge does the same thing. The coarse boulders and cobbles are on the bottom of the stream near bedrock. A dredge turns everything upside down, puts the boulders on top. And so it takes a long time for it to reclaim, like maybe 1,000,000 years. This is Rich Hill. Remember that photograph I showed you in the Mother Lode country of them doing the same thing? Big hill, alluvial material. So they're breaking this up and they're catching, you see all the sluices down there, catching it in. And so they can really leverage with this kind of mining. It's pretty devastating. And eventually the downstream farmers got so angry that they got the legislature to stop it. Here's a bucket line dredge. As you drive through Idaho and the Rocky Mountain West, you see all kinds of dredges. They always look different. They build them in sight with all the materials they can, but they bring in the buckets because they can't make those on site. A bucket line dredge can move an awful lot of material, but also they're not very efficient. They say the sunbeam dredge probably left 40 or 50% of the gold, maybe more.
Wow.
And so this is in Hughes Creek, which is just north of North Fork, coming into the, if you've ever been up there, it's if you happen to drive by it and see it, it's really worth a drive to go in there. These are incredible. It makes you want to get a contract with Safeway to sell them cobbles because all these things were hand stacked from the sluice channel where they pick it up, and it was all done by hand. Huge amount of work, very labor intensive, but it was apparently very rich. Okay, last slide, and I wanted to make the point that there were no environmental restrictions at all for mining until 1969, and that was indirect. That just required an environmental assessment, and so nothing was really done into the 70s. Everything, all this stuff was done, including these surface management regulations by the agencies, and there's been really nothing new since by 77. So 72 to 77, and now they really have a lot of control. But this was all done by Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. I just thought I'd leave that thought with you. So, okay, now we're ready for questions. Well, let me verify that that's it. Yeah, that's it. So, any question on anything?
So, Terry,
John?
Do you see in the future the laws or anything coming in the future that would update?
Well, that's a good question because, the environmental groups made a huge push in 1972 to get rid of the law. They said, this is our big chance. It's a 100th year anniversary, very significant, and they tried. It's been tried a dozen times since. It has huge staying power, and so, right now I would be reluctant to say it ever would be, but it could be. But I want you to know it's been tried and tried desperately hard 100 years or 50 years ago, particularly on its 100th anniversary.
Can I ask you one follow-up on that? Then?
Sure.
What would you think would be an improvement to it in general, just some general ideas?
Well, what I've seen in my career is that a lot more money's been put into the ground than taken out. In some cases, it's not, but if you take into consideration, well, like Lake Coeur d'Alene, probably one of the richest properties in Idaho is the lead, silver, zinc stuff up in Coeur d'Alene. But the environmental damages, there's I don't know how many hundreds of feet of toxic waste at the bottom of the lake. And so I mean, you can regulate that. About 1970, well, after these came in, late 70s, excuse me, late 70s, they started on every proposed mining operation. They would go through the environmental impact statement. Which takes years, and they used to say it. Almost nobody but a wealthy company would even try because it costs so much. You had the, your mine tailings and everything, and even in this state, like the Cypress mine up in, it seems like invariably the tailings dams ruptured and the stuff got out, even no matter how well it was designed. I was never involved in that, so I was always at the end of analyzing the geology and things like this. But as you got into it mid-career, by the time these environmental laws came along, you had to add that cost in. Basically, you do a cost analysis to see if this thing's going to make money. And if it doesn't make money because the compliance with environmental costs are so high, and so very few of them cross that hurdle by now more than ever. So
we spend quite a bit of time up in Salmon. So the Hughes Creek area we've seen, so it was fascinating to hear you talk about it. But when we were up there the last few weeks, not pre-fire, we talked to one of the helicopter pilots that was lifting in the drilling equipment and sampling and supplies for the lithium project going on up there. So they're still looking with environmental years before that would
yeah, it's a really tough one for mine, particularly most of the lithium properties, and it's interesting there's so many of them. This is near Panther Creek, isn't it?
Yeah.
That one, yeah. I actually had was following that for quite a while, and then we got a number of lithium properties in this country, and now on TV, the other night there was one down, and they're talking about lithium in the Salton Sea. And it's apparently there's dissolved in the geothermal waters down there, but there's horrific environmental problems with recovering it. So, but if it's valuable enough, they can do almost always mitigate it and do it, recover the stuff. But that's lithium and batteries and stuff like that is supposed to be our salvation for global warming, but lithium and just the energy to charge those batteries is not a small thing, so work in progress. Anybody else?
Well, if there were questions, please give a nice thanks.